You have no idea how disappointed I am Jill didn't introduce me. The only time she's required to say something nice about me. I'd like to have that said. Ladies and gentlemen, I am truly delighted to be here tonight. Y'all are going to be seeing an awful lot of me. The states I'm going to be concentrating on are Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, New Hampshire, and Iowa, and I'm going to be here a lot. So I'm looking forward to working with you all. We plan on winning Florida. We can't win without Florida. We can't win without Bill Nelson in Florida. Can't mention Bill without mentioning Grace, literally. And ladies and gentlemen, they become two of the best friends for Jill and me in our career in the Senate and now. No one worked harder for us this last time around than Bill and Grace. And as old Jim East from Mississippi told me once, when I was running for election in 1978, he said, Joe, what would old Jim Easton do for you in Delaware? I said, Mr. Chairman, some places you had helped, true story, and some places you hurt. And he said, well, I'll come to Delaware and campaign for you or against you, whichever will help the most. Well, that's what I'll do for Bill and any one of the Democrats on this ticket. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, Debbie is doing an amazing job. I've loved her for a long time. Ever she thought I was good enough to be president back in those days. And I tell you what, she is been not only in 23 states, she has raised money, raised awareness, raised volunteers, and raised our prospects in every one of those states. So thank you for letting us. Look, folks, the fact of the matter is that I don't need to remind you of the catastrophe we inherited, that America inherited, after 8 years of the last administration. When Barack and I were sworn in on that bitterly cold day in January, looked out at literally 1 million people standing on the National Mall, you could sense their sense of hope and faith and expectation. It was an incredible sight. But there was something else on the faces of those 1 million people. There was concern, uncertainty, in some cases even fear. Practically before I lowered my hand on January the 20th, by that time, at that moment, that month, we had already lost 740,000 jobs just that month. That quarter, our economy shrunk to almost historic lows, 6.4% loss in our GDP. And before Barack and I sat down at our desks, we already inherited a bill for $1,300 billion for that year and a projected deficit of $8 trillion over the next 10. Middle-class Americans lost $16 trillion in household wealth. It vanished without a trace. As you know, better than almost any state, here in Florida, the equity in people's houses evaporated before their eyes. The retirement funds, as the market was talked about going below 600, that also evaporated. And with it, all the wealth that they had. And with it, their hopes and expectations for how they would and could retire, their ability to send their children to school, their security. That's why I find it absolutely bizarre, Republicans moralizing about deficits. That's a little like an arsonist moralizing about fire safety. These guys have zero credibility. Zero credibility. Their vision of economic policy and their plan for prosperity lay in creative financial instruments, credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, subprime mortgages. They gave us a bubble, and they called it an economy. Ladies and gentlemen, in addition, we inherited a foreign policy that was in disarray. We had lost the respect of our allies and the fear of our enemies. We were nearly a decade into 2 wars, 180,000 Americans deployed in harm's way, 150,000 alone in Iraq. Osama bin Laden remained at large and continued to plot new attacks on America. In short, we were a nation isolated in the world and on the verge, literally, of depression. America was in trouble, and the folks we represent needed help. And they didn't understand. My dad, who Bill and Grace met, used to have an expression. He said, "Don't, Joey, I never expect the government to solve my problems, but at least I expect my government to understand my problems." He's the son of a proud man who knew what it was like to be denied a loan to be able to send his child to college. A son of a proud man who had to leave his family and move to a different city to find work with the hope that he'd be able to bring his family together later. You know, the longest walk any parent can make is up a short flight of stairs to their child's bedroom. Say, "Honey, I'm sorry, but Dad's got to leave," or "Mom has to leave." My dad made that walk in Scranton, Pennsylvania, when I was going into 4th grade. He said, "Joey, there's no jobs here. You're going to have to stay with your grandpa, you and Mom, Jimmy and Val. I've got to move to Wilmington with Uncle Frank, and I'll try to come home every weekend. It's only 156 miles, Joey." I thought it was 1,000. Could have been, for all I knew. He said, "But I promise you, when I get a job and get enough money, I'm going to get a nice place to bring you and Mom and the kids down to Wilmington." It wasn't until I got to be probably in my late 20s that I understood that that proud, graceful man had even a longer walk to make. Into my grandfather Ambrose Finnegan's pantry to say, "Ambrose, I need a favor. Can you keep feeding the kids? I promise I'll make it up. I promise it'll be okay." That's a hard thing for any man or woman to have to say. Think of how many Floridians you know who've had to make that walk. Think of how many have lost their homes, lost their jobs, and lost their self-respect. My dad used to say, "Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about your respect. Your respect in the community." And Barack and I, when we ran in 08, we knew that it was our job not only to restore the economy, but even more importantly, to restore people's dignity and regain their respect. These Republicans talk about job losses like it's a statistic. Ladies and gentlemen, an awful lot of our friends have been knocked down. It's a consequence of the failed policies that are being peddled again. Barack and I knew in order to avoid, literally, not figuratively, another depression, we had to stabilize the financial markets, unfreeze credit, get banks lending again to businesses so they can meet payrolls, to give people a fighting chance, begin to refinance. We knew that if the auto industry collapsed, as it was on the verge of doing, not reorganizing, but liquidating, we knew in spite of what Romney and others said at the time, that we would permanently lose 1 million jobs related to the industry. So we told the industry, shape up, reorganize, and if you do, we will help you. Not popular. We also knew that we needed to restore Wall Street to its proper and critically important role of allocating capital to business and industries that can be used most efficiently. We knew we had to get the deficit under control and deal with the single biggest driver of the deficit, healthcare costs. And ladies and gentlemen, we knew we had to restore protections for workers and unions. Yes, unions. They built the middle class. So we strengthened the LRB. We made them take off their black shirts and put on striped shirts and be referees again as they were supposed to be. Results are clear. Instead of hemorrhaging 6.5 million jobs in the year before we got our program in place, as Debbie pointed out, we've created 2,600,000 jobs. 19 consecutive months of private sector growth. Not enough. Instead of losing 1 million jobs permanently, we have added in the last year 111,000 auto jobs. General Motors and Chrysler are healthy. They're paying off their government loans. And the American people, the first time in 23 years, according to J.D. Power, thinks that Americans make better cars than foreign cars. And instead of being able to continue to repackage toxic debt and selling it to unsuspecting investors, Wall Streeters are now required to be transparent. Ladies and gentlemen, I love these guys that talk about capitalism as if they're for it and we're against it. The entirety of the capitalist system is based upon transparency. And sunlight, especially when it comes to Wall Street, is the best disinfectant and the best cure for what ails us. Ladies and gentlemen, instead of long-term debt increasing as predicted by $100 billion over the next 10 years because of health care costs and $1 trillion in the second decade, we passed health care reform and literally bent the cost curve, and in the process provided 30 million Americans who didn't have access to health care. As Debbie said, in the process, with the leadership of Bill Nelson and Debbie, we eliminated Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We passed the Act for equal pay for equal work. We cut private banks out of the middleman, saving taxpayers $60 million in student loans. That's some of what we did at home. But beyond our borders, as President Obama said last week I should say, the tide of war is receding. Instead of having 150,000 combat troops tied down in Iraq, when we got elected, President Obama assigned me Iraq. Literally, not figuratively, as Bill will tell you. And folks, he said, get us home. By this Christmas, 150,000 Americans will be out of Iraq, and we'll end this war in Iraq. In the process, left behind a democratic government with a chance of serving those people. And maybe the most important thing President Obama did was refocus our eyes and our power on the prize, Osama bin Laden. Instead of being a war that the last administration ignored and let adrift, we're now focused and succeeding. We have literally eviscerated Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden is dead. 34 of the top Al-Qaeda leaders are gone, including number 2 and including Anwar al-Awlaki, the American cleric who was planning these attacks. Instead of going it alone in Libya, we had a president, finally, who was strong enough to confront our enemies and wise enough to consult and engage our allies. The consequence, Gaddafi is dead, Libya is free, and not one American soldier lost their life. In short, we've literally restored America's image around the world and put our country, our economy in the path to recovery. But folks, the only way I can describe what happened next is Republican obstructions. I have served in the Senate a long time. As Bill will tell you, over my career, I had as many friends in the Republican Party as the Democratic Party. I can say without fear of contradiction, no Republican in the Senate ever doubted my word, and there was no one I was unable to work with. But ladies and gentlemen, this ain't your father's Republican Party. Just as we're turning the corner on the economy, these guys started playing roulette with the national debt, playing brinksmanship. They took charge of the House. They didn't want to just stop what we're doing. They wanted to undo everything that we had done. Some people think this Republican obstruction is about ideology. Other people think it's just about politics. I'll leave that for the American people to decide. But I know one thing. It doesn't matter which it is. They're standing in the way of progress. As a student of history like many of you, back in the 1940s, when FDR was facing a time of economic crisis with the specter of war on the horizon, he found that almost every one of his legislative efforts, including the entire New Deal, were being stopped by a Republican Congress, led by Bruce Martin from New York, Joseph Martin from Massachusetts, and Hamilton Fish from New York. So when Roosevelt talked about everything he tried to do, everything that was stopped, he would list what he called, and I quote, a beautiful rhythm of opposition. Martin, Barton, and Fisher. Today, I can say there remains a beautiful rhythm of opposition. Boehner, Cantor, and Mitch. They have a different theory of the case. They actually assert, and I suspect they believe, that the reason banks aren't lending and they are flush and businesses aren't expanding, notwithstanding the fact corporate America has almost $2 trillion in assets, capital, that they could spend. They think it's because they're not spending and lending. They say because of regulation, because of taxes on the wealthy, and because of the uncertainty of health care reform. So their answer shouldn't surprise you. They think we should once again deregulate Wall Street. Put the cowboys back in the saddle. No, literally. You'd think if you didn't know better, they're counting on America having collective amnesia. If you didn't know better, you'd think I was making this up. They not only think we should actually keep the Bush tax cuts were designed to expire for the top 1%, but they believe we should increase the tax cuts for the wealthiest. They believe the answer to the deficit is to repeal health care, without realizing or acknowledging that will increase the debt by over $100 billion by 2022, 2021, and another $1 trillion after that. And in the process, eliminate insurance for 30 million people who need it. Boehner, Cantor, and Mitch. Listen to what they say. Literally, this is important. Speaker Boehner is a friend of mine. I personally like him. Literally, I get on with him, as most of my colleagues here can tell you.
He said, our efforts to relate the financial industry and hold Wall Street accountable was, quote, like using a nuclear weapon to kill an ant. I pointed out to him that that ant took 8 million jobs. Speaking to the Economic Club of Washington, D.C., in an extensive and well-ordered speech, said, and I quote, we need to liberate our economy from the shackles government has placed upon it. Folks, the last time we liberated the economy, we put the middle class in chains. Leader Cantor, he said we can't respond to major disasters like Hurricane Irene or floods or fires unless we, quote, make sure there are savings elsewhere. And guess where they find the savings? Healthcare for the middle class, college affordability, renewable energy. And my friend, the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, said, quote, the single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. Folks, it's not just, this is serious stuff, it's not just Boehner, Cantor, and Mitch. It's Ryan, Romney, and Rick. We're all singing on the same hymn, as they say. Social Security, quote, a Ponzi scheme, a monstrous lie of this generation, end of quote. I might be repeating that 6,000 times in Florida. Medicare, quote, the equivalent of getting taken for a ride. Voucherizing. Foreclosures. You just heard Romney. He said, quote, don't try to stop the foreclosure process. Let it run its course and hit the bottom. He wasn't raised in my neighborhood. He didn't. I'm serious. I think they just don't know the people I grew up with. I think they just don't know what the American people are going through. And the guy you know well, Governor Scott. Deep cuts in education, voter suppression, Arizona-style immigration law, no to $2.4 billion for high-speed rail. The list goes on and on. And what your governor is doing here is exactly what Republicans want to do with the entire nation. And that's not hyperbole. Not a joke. And on foreign policy, they want to stay in Iraq. Isn't that kind of fascinating? Yeah. Listen to them now, by the way. They're so-called foreign policy experts. They want to stay in Iraq. And one of them, Governor of Texas, seems willing, based on what he said, to send American military troops across the Mexican border into the sovereign state of Mexico to deal with their problem. Folks, I know this election is not going to be about foreign policy, but let me remind you, there is a minimum threshold any man or woman has to cross on their mastery of national security and foreign policy for the American people to think they're even remotely eligible to be president. And these guys got a long way to go. You know, my father always used to say, Joey, it never hurts to be a big man. It doesn't take much. Yet, every Republican candidate for president, after Gaddafi was killed, congratulated NATO and didn't mention the U.S. commitment to U.S. forces. Folks, even though this mission could not have been possible without the American aircraft, American coordination, American intelligence, many folks, including your junior senator, took the time to congratulate the French and British forces while they criticized the President of the United States of America. This is not just about this is a different president. Folks, This next election is not a referendum, it's a choice. And we're going to make that choice clear. When I got elected as a 29-year-old kid to the United States Senate, shortly after I was elected in 73, sworn in 73, my great friend, and he really did become, as Bill will tell you, one of my closest friends and confidants, Teddy Kennedy, invited me as a 31-year-old kid to address the Massachusetts Democratic dinner in Boston. I'll never forget, I was in the Copley Hotel getting ready and nervous about speaking in front of Senator Kennedy and the first big major dinner I ever did as a senator. And I was putting on my tie and I was watching the television, the evening news, the 6 or 6:30 news in Boston. And there was a mayor named Kevin White who was a phenom who got elected in 1970 as sort of the John Lindsay of New York. And he was having a little trouble. He was up for re-election. And as he walked out of his office, a gaggle of press grabbed him and in essence said, "Okay, wise guy, you're not doing so hot now. What's going on?" I'll never forget what Kevin White said. He put his hand up, and I didn't know him. He put his hand out, he said, "Look, don't compare me to the Almighty. Compare me to the alternative." Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to compare us to the alternative. So, folks, in the face of this Republican obstructionism, I actually have serious reporters say, "Why don't you sit down with the Republicans?" We sat down with them for 2.5 years.
Yeah!
They delivered their own party. We decided we cannot wait. The American people cannot wait. They cannot continue to be subjected to what they're doing. So what do? We introduced a jobs bill that almost every independent validator acknowledges would create close to 2 million jobs, generate economic growth by 2%. It would keep 400,000 teachers, cops, firefighters on the job this year. As Debbie said, it would cut taxes for 94% of American workers by roughly $1,500. As she said, that's 4 months of groceries and 6 months of gas in the neighborhood I was raised in. That matters. The President and I have reached a conclusion about their obstruction. We've got to try to go over their heads. We've got to go to the people. We can't wait. The American people can't wait. We can't wait to address foreclosures. So the President issued an executive order to give more than 1 million folks a chance to refinance their homes from 6% to 4%, saving them $2,000 a year. In my neighborhood, that's real money. We can't wait to address the affordability of college. The President announced he's going to let college graduates cap their loan payments at 10% of their income. That's going to help a lot of people being crushed right now by the weight of their student loan debt. We can't wait to innovate new companies and incubate them. That's why we announced today that we're speeding up the process of getting R&D out into federal labs, into the hands of businesses that can commercialize it. We can't wait, and we aren't waiting, because at the end of the day, it's about dignity and respect. Ladies and gentlemen, it's about restoring the middle class. They've been clobbered. It's about putting mothers and fathers in the neighborhoods we all grow up in once again in the position of being able to look into their child's eye and believe what they say when they say, "Honey, if you work hard, if you play by the rules, if you get a good education, there's nothing you can't do." They doubt it now. It's simple. It's simple. The test we apply. We will measure 8 years of our effort in terms of whether or not American moms and dads can turn to their kids and say with some certainty, "Honey, it's going to be okay." That's why we're not going to relent. That's why we're not going to relent. That's why we believe the American people are going to return us to office in 2012. When I began this speech, I talked about the longest walk. We're determined to replace that walk with a different kind of journey. A journey that restores a father's dignity by allowing him to send his talented daughter to college knowing she won't have to spend the rest of her life paying for her education. A journey that allows a woman to take a new job where she will be paid the same salary as a man for the same work. A salary that will allow her to support her family. Folks, we've set America on a different path, a new journey. One that our friends and the other team are trying to obstruct. One that allows us to lead the world in the 21st century as we did in the 20th. Where we are once again a nation of innovators, educators, and builders. The policies of the last administration and the obstruction of this Republican Congress have knocked a lot of people off their feet. Folks, it's long past time we get back up, that we stand up, that we reclaim what every American thought was their birthright, the American dream, that if you give them a chance, there's nothing that they're incapable of accomplishing. There's only one way we can do that. It's to do it together and to make sure that we win. Because, folks, the choice is stark and clear. I am not exaggerating when I say it. And I've said this, and I was accused of bringing up Bush. I respect President Bush as a man. I thought his policies were terrible. But ladies and gentlemen, name me one major initiative on taxes, on jobs, on Wall Street, on foreclosures, on promoting innovation, on infrastructure, the Republicans offer that is any different at all from what was done the 8 years when they controlled the presidency. I cannot find one. So, folks, when I got elected in '72 as a kid, I was described as an optimist, even an idealist. But I was neither. I was a realistic young man then, as I am an older man now. Because my optimism then and now isn't based on naivete. It's literally, and think about it, remind yourselves, it's based on my knowledge and your knowledge of the history, of the journey of the American people. For we Americans know we do not have to accept a situation we cannot bear. We literally have it within ourselves to determine our own fate. We always had. We've done it in the Depression. We did it after the Civil War. We've done it throughout our life as a nation. So, folks, today I look at all of you and say, I am more optimistic today. I am more certain about America's future than I have ever been in my life. We are better positioned as a nation relative to the world to capture the 21st century. I just spent 10 days in the Far East. President Hu and President Barack Obama asked the new incoming president, Xi and me, to get to know one another. We spent 4 days traveling their countries. People thought when I went in August I was going to explain America's situation. I didn't go to explain a thing. I pointed out how we hope they continue to succeed because stability in that part of the world is important. I reminded them their economy is 1/3 as large as ours. They own less than 1% of the financial instruments of the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, it took them 20 years to get 30 years to get 20% of their population out of abject poverty. They have no safety net because of the abhorrent policy of one child. They have one person working for every 4 that needs to be supported. Ladies and gentlemen, remember who we are. We were then, we are now, and we're in better position than any nation in the world to dominate the 21st century economically. There's a reason why, in the midst of all these crises, every nation continues to invest in U.S. treasuries. Why? We're the most secure, the most certain, and the most capable nation in the world. So folks, it's time to stand up